Now, I'm sure many of you actually seen the movie National Treasure. Now, in that movie, Trinity Church is featured in it, and there's a lot of Masonic connections to it. While movies like National Treasure, The Da Vinci Code are Hollywood fiction, the following events really happened, and it was real Freemasons who were involved in them. So today, most New Yorkers think of upstate New York as being either cities like Syracuse, Albany, Buffalo, Binghamton, etc., or they think of it as farm country. And there is a lot of farm country. Back in the 18th century, it was not. Yeah, there were small pockets of farming communities here and there, but almost all this land was wilderness. I mean, it was the frontier. You could still run into a great eastern elk or a giant moose walking these lands. It was rough country. It was tough to live up here. Sir William Johnson originally came to this land, and it was wilderness like this. His uncle, Peter Warren, who was the sponsor of his whole expedition and business up in northern New York State. So Peter Warren was actually married to Susanna Delancey. So Susanna Delancey was the aunt of Oliver Delancey, who was one of the founding members of Westchester Lodge number 46. And this just goes to show how small the world was back in colonial America. William Johnson actually made his money as a trader. He would import goods from Europe, sent to him by his uncle, came to the wilderness in New York actually pretty early on, before the French and Indian War. But he fought in the French and Indian War, and he truly went native. I mean, he became one of the members of the Mohawk tribe, and he would actually put war paint on his face, and he would strip down and just wear like a loincloth. He truly did go native. At the same time, you know, he could go to Albany and, you know, dress in his fineries and trade with the best of them, but he certainly much preferred hunting and fishing and living the life that the Native Americans did. So this is Johnson Hall in Johnstown, New York. Sir William Johnson built this house. Sir John Johnson took it over upon his death. You can see off to the sides of this building, on both sides, there are these stone structures. These were actually built as defensive fortifications around the time of Pontiac's War, or Pontiac's Rebellion. Sir William died of a stroke on July 11th, 1774, right here at Johnson Hall during an Indian conference. That day he had given about an hour's speech in the hot sun. The Boston Tea Party had occurred the prior December, and it was as if the world that Sir William had built died with him. It was the year following Sir William Johnson's death, 1775, when the American Revolution really kicked off. On April 18th, hundreds of British troops left Boston. Their goal was to go to Concord, Massachusetts, and seize the firearms of all the militia. Brother Paul Revere of St. Andrew's Lodge in Boston got upon his horse, and with several others, they took their famous midnight ride. The following day was the Battle of Lexington and Concord, where the British regulars faced off against the Continental men. This began the siege of Boston, which was to last until January of 1776. In May of 1775, following the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the one who must not be named, along with Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys, stormed Fort Ticonderoga. They seized the cannons there. Masonic brother Henry Knox met them. He took those cannons and through the snow and the frozen lakes, took them to Boston. He arrived in Boston January 1776, and the arrival of those cannons helped end the siege of Boston, which ended in March. Meanwhile, in June of 1775 was the famous Battle of Bunker Hill. And it was three men very close to Sir William Johnson who were about to play a very large role in the events that were to follow. The first was his son, John Johnson, Sir John Johnson, who became the second baronet on Sir William's death. The second was John Butler, and the third was Joseph Brant. Sir John, from a very early age, was exposed to warfare. At 13 years old, his father, Sir William, took him on campaign during the French and Indian Wars. Now, in 1771, Sir John became the Grand Master Mason for the states of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And St. Patrick's Lodge, the lodge that Sir William actually founded, had their first meetings here. Sir John's second wife was Mary Nicole Watts. So John Watts Jr. was the brother of Mary Nicole Watts, who was the wife of Sir John Johnson. On April 30th, 1789, Brother George Washington stood on the balcony of the old Federal Hall, which stood right here at the corner of Wall Street and Broad Street in Lower Manhattan. He placed his hand on the Holy Bible. Now that Holy Bible belonged to St. John's Lodge number 1. And administering the oath of office was Chancellor Robert R. Livingston. He was also the first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the State of New York. Now, Robert Livingston was not always Chancellor. At a prior point, he was actually the Recorder of New York. And following him in that office was none other than the Honorable John Watts Jr. So Mary Nicole Watts and John Watts Jr.'s parents were Anne Delancey and John Watts Sr. Now, Anne Delancey was another aunt of Oliver Delancey from Westchester Lodge 46. John Watts Sr. was a Loyalist, and he did flee to England. Unfortunately, the Watts family lost their properties here. However, they were able to buy them back. So John Watts Jr. is buried in the grounds of Trinity Church, and his gravesite and statue is very close to where Alexander Hamilton is also buried. He did serve in the New York State Assembly as well as in the United States House of Representatives. Now, John Watts Jr. also served as a judge in Westchester County from 1802 to 1807. We actually found John Watts Jr.'s name in the lodge returns of Westchester Lodge 46. Now, when we first looked up John Watts Jr. to see if he was a Mason, there was no mention of it anywhere we found. So we don't know whether this was a new discovery, but fortunately Alex Vistola from the Livingston Library was able to confirm that he was indeed a Mason. He believes he also found his father's names, as well as 2 of John Watts Jr.'s sons. So John Watts Jr. has the unique distinction of being the only person to have served under the Crown in New York, as well as the newly formed United States of America. Now, John Watts Jr. was a good friend to John George Leake, who was the brother-in-law to his sister Margaret. Now, John Leake actually passed away in 1827. He had no heirs. He left his entire fortune to John Watts Jr. Now, John Watts Jr. did not take that money for himself. He actually formed an orphanage. That orphanage name was Leake and Watts. It is still in operation today under the name Rising Ground. The organization is fairly large, and it does have offices throughout the tri-state area. Another active parishioner in Trinity Church at one time was the notorious pirate Captain William Kidd. There are many American Revolutionary War veterans who are buried here at Trinity Church. There's a large monument behind me to them. It looks like it's under some sort of restoration. So the second person was John Butler. Now, John Butler had served under Sir William during the French and Indian Wars. He also received the sublime degree of Master Mason along with Sir William at Union Lodge number 1 in Albany on the same day. John Butler would go on to form the ruthless Butler's Rangers, which would play a very big role in events to come. Now, the third person would be Joseph Brant. Now, Joseph Brant was Mary Brant's brother. She was the wife of Sir William. Sir William really looked after Joseph Brant. He sent him to a fine education at a school that would eventually become Dartmouth College. He mentored him in politics. Joseph Brant's bust is actually carved into the New York State Capitol building. Joseph Brant made trips to England. He received the sublime degree of Master Mason in London in 1776. Now, all 3 of these men played vital roles in the events that were about to unfold in the Mohawk Valley and throughout New York State. It was under Sir William's tutelage that these men gained their skills and knowledge. Unfortunately, none of the 3 were able to hold the world together like Sir William did. So this is the lodge building of St. Patrick's Lodge number 4. It was originally chartered in 1766 as St. Patrick's Lodge number 8. Their first master was none other than Sir William Johnson. Their first senior warden was his nephew Guy Johnson, and their secretary was the notorious John Butler. Now this lodge also raised nearly 50 men who went on to serve in the American Revolution. Included in that was none other than General Nicholas Herkimer and 14 members of his Tryon County militia. The lodge also raised the Benjamin Hoyt, who served in the Westchester County militia. And when Sir John Johnson fled to Canada, he actually grabbed their charter and took it with them to Canada. So this is the grave of Sir William Johnson. You can see here there's a chronology of events, including the date that he became master of St. Patrick's Lodge number 8. In the movie National Treasure, they find a huge hoarded treasure at the end. It's supposedly the treasure of the Freemasons. However, I think most Masonic members would agree that the true national treasure is American Freemasonry itself.